listening to Stories from Real Life, a podcast by engaging storytellers for engaged story listeners. Here's your host, author and journalist, Melvin E. Edwards.
Hello and welcome to this special edition of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Today is a preseason Houston Texans football episode, and my guest is Sporting News contributing writer Garret Williams. He runs Houston Texans on X and can be found as Texans commenter on X and TikTok. So Garret, welcome to Stories from Real Life.
Melvin, I appreciate it. The little bit I've learned about you and your podcast and your background is very interesting. And I appreciate you having me on. And, you know, as I'm sure you can tell, I'm a big fan of the Texans and can talk Texans anytime, anywhere.
Well, I appreciate you being here. So to the listeners, especially if you're new here, please subscribe and follow this podcast on Good Pods or your favorite podcast app. So before we get to talking about Texans and NFL football, let's talk about you, Garret. So I'm curious, where did you grow up?
Yeah, so I'm born and raised in Houston, Texas, in Northwest Houston. So I've been a lifelong Houston sports fan of all the major teams ever since I could talk. So, you know, that kind of, you know, naturally integrated into what I'm doing now. I just, as a normal person, you know, I've always been on Twitter and the shadows, as you will, you know, observing news on my favorite sports teams, specifically the Texans. And I guess, you know, this may have been a question you would have asked, but I'm going to go and explain it now, basically how I started my page. Anyways, last December, I, you know, finally decided to make a separate page for the Texans to kind of get my takes out there. And I never really had the intention of having it be to where it is now. It's kind of been like a natural progression, and it's something that I'm very passionate about. And for me, it's like I mentioned, you know, ever since I could talk, it's just been my personality for all Houston sports teams that I basically have consumed anything and everything, whether it be articles, the games itself, interviews, etc. And so now I'm basically just doing what I normally do, but taking the extra step of sharing what I happen to see when I do that I think is pertinent that other fans should see as well. And I've enjoyed doing it quite a bit, and I've seen quite a bit of success, and I don't plan on stopping anytime soon. So
nice. And you put out really good content, and I followed you for a few months now, and I really enjoy it.
I appreciate that. And, you know, the more I've gotten into it, I've learned with this Houston Texans team, it's literally a 24/7 news cycle. I mean, as much as I post, I could be posting more. So it's a very interesting time for Texans fans, and hopefully it's here to stay.
So are you blessing or stressing?
Yes, I love it. So that's my moniker. If anybody listening isn't aware, that's kind of where I've kind of taken off a little bit. So to kind of rewind a little bit on that. Early on in the year, last year, when I had started my account, there was a stretch where the Texans, for those of you who have watched the Texans, I would say there's 5 or 6 games in a row where every game came down to the final minutes or even minute. And whether it was win or lose, we did come out on the winning side more often than not. It was definitely a stressful experience as a fan. And so that's kind of where I came up with a nickname, Houston Stressins. And then eventually it kind of evolved into a love it or hate it, a question saying, are you blessing or stressing? And, you know, my fans and followers have kind of caught on to that and enjoyed it. So to answer your question, I am definitely blessing, that is for sure.
All right. So why did you decide to call the page Stressins rather than Blessings?
So, I mean, at the time it was, you know, like I had mentioned, we were stressing, but I have definitely been asked and considered changing my nickname to Blessings. But lately I've been saying that I will do that whenever one of two things happens, whichever happens first. If I get an interview with CJ Stroud or the Texans win the Super Bowl, that means I will change my name to Houston Blessings.
Okay. Maybe we can have both those things happen at the same time.
That's what I hope.
All right. So how long have you worked for the Sporting News?
It's been since early March, I believe. I'm not sure the exact date, but That one kind of started organically too. I noticed a lot of my material, tweets, and content was being put in articles, and I would kind of just repost it in, a humble brag type of way. Say, "Oh, look, I got posted an article." And eventually, an editor from Sporting News had reached out and said, "Hey, do you want to write?" And I honestly have never had any background in writing, but being as passionate as I am about the Texans, and consuming pretty much every piece of content there is out there, I figured it was worth a shot. So there has been a lull. There's been some changes with the editor there, so I haven't written in like a month or two. But it's been a fun experience and definitely a learning experience. I've really enjoyed it.
Okay, that sounds great. So before last season, the Houston Texans were known as a barely functioning organization. So what's been your favorite part of covering the Texans or following the Texans in the past 18 months or so?
Yeah, so all of us real fans know, I say where we're at now is definitely a position that us fans deserve. So, it really has put things into perspective. We can truly appreciate where we're at now because of what we went through prior. But I would say the favorite thing about how we've transformed is, I got to say, is DeMeco Ryans. I guess, it's hard to pick one, but I guess you can just say the two-headed monster, I guess we'll call it, is of DeMeco Ryans and CJ Stroud. Obviously in the NFL, the most important position, probably in all of sports, is quarterback. And then aside from that, in my opinion, all the talent in the NFL is extremely good. And so to me, the difference between being, that top tier team, obviously quarterback, but the next thing is coaching. I think coaching is paramount. And not only is DeMeco Ryans a great coach, but he is a great leader and a great person. Every time I listen to him speak, I just, as a fan, I can't help but feel more and more content and not worried about my team. So I've said, as long as we have CJ Stroud and DeMeco Ryans, any and everything else could happen and we'll still be fine, when you boil it down to its simplest form. So obviously I watched a lot of interviews, and watching DeMeco speak and CJ's interviews are absolutely incredible. And I should say, not only are they good as player and coach and leaders, but as people. You listen to them talk, they're just genuinely good people. You don't really get to choose the personalities of the people that you get to root for your team. And so they've made it that much easier for us to root for them, the fact that they're such good people. So that's definitely been something I've enjoyed.
Yes, same here. It's listening to CJ after games, and he's going to deflect attention away from himself. He's going to first thank God for his success or whatever happened in the game. He's going to give the credit to his teammates and to his coaches, and then he's going to get ready for the next game. He's very intense, but he's very focused. He's very humble, and obviously very talented. So he's fun to watch.
Very mature too, I might add. For someone so young, it's extremely impressive. Obviously I've watched any and every interview that he's done, but he continues to impress me each time he speaks. For someone being so young, his perspective on things, and he chooses to see the positive side on things. And DeMeco, they kind of share that same philosophy, whereas, a lot of younger people or athletes may be more reactionary or emotional. And, the humbleness, like you said, too, is something that's very impressive. And then I would like to add, too, everything that we see, us as Texans fans know him better, obviously, than other fans. And to me, people that still aren't convinced that CJ is as good as we believe he is because they don't know him like we do, in my opinion. If you have the time to listen to him talk, his mental makeup. And to me, the mental makeup is just as important as the physical makeup for an NFL quarterback. You see some of the greats, they have that elite mental ability. And so since, you and I kind of follow him closely, we're able to realize that. So I think that's something after this year with sustained success playing and then even more exposure publicly, I think people will start to realize that more and more.
Okay. So I don't know how old you are, but are you old enough to have followed the Oilers at all?
There was a brief overlap. I'm 35, so I didn't really get.
Yeah, you're kind of young. They left Houston in '96, 7, so you would have been probably like 7.
Yeah.
Like 8
I remember
years
being
old.
in like 4th or 5th grade when the Titans first came out. But yeah, I think I'd gone to an Oilers game when I was younger, but I was probably 3 or 4 and I wasn't really
You wouldn't
old
have.
enough to remember.
Yeah. So what are some of your favorite memories of the history of this team then? We'll just stay focused on the Texans.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the inaugural game against the Dallas Cowboys, winning that game with the Billy Miller touchdown, obviously was a great memory, even though I was still a little bit younger, but I definitely remember it. And then there were some lean years early on, and then obviously the Kubiak years, there was a 2 or 3 year stretch there where things were very promising. Watching those teams, obviously the J.J. Watt interception pick 6 against Cincinnati in the wild card playoff game is definitely a top moment. Just recently, the induction of Andre Johnson into the Hall of Fame was an awesome moment. And then the ability to go back and reminisce on all the memories, that was a pretty cool deal to remember those moments. There's been a lot, but with that being said, I don't think there has been more excitement in the history of our franchise. And I don't know the history nearly as well for the Oilers, but I would probably say you could probably do it for any Houston NFL team, potentially sports team in the history of the Houston sports. This might be the most anticipated season. I mean, with how big football is and how much we all love football in Houston and all the stars we have and the people in place, I don't know if it's ever been higher than what it is now.
It certainly has not been higher for me, and I've been a fan back to the late 70s with the Oilers and the Love You Blue era. I remember being pretty excited about the 1980 season because 78 and 79 we've gone to AFC Championship back-to-back years and lost both the years to the Steelers. And Bum Phillips gave his speech about knocking on the door, and next year we're going to kick the SOB in. And so that got me. I was like 13 years old. So I was excited about that season, thinking, all right, this year we're going to take the next step. We're going to the Super Bowl. And unfortunately, we didn't even get as far that year, and Bum was fired, and we were in the wilderness for 40 years after that.
Yeah,
so this year, I'm a huge baseball fan. That's my number one sports, and football is second. So generally, I watch football to keep me distracted until baseball season starts up again. But this year, even during the midst of baseball season, I've been consuming all the Texans content I can find because I'm so excited about the season. There's so much promise. And even if not to get to Super Bowl this year, then it feels like we've got a good chance to get multiple Super Bowls in the next 10 years. And that's a position that Texans fans have not been in before.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. So, I mean, obviously the excitement and expectations for this year are very high, but we are set up for sustained success. And it kind of goes back to my point earlier. I mean, the two most important positions, head coach and quarterback, we have solidified. So, and obviously, too, I would be remiss to not mention GM. Nick Caserio has been doing a great job.
Yes.
And obviously, he was there before D'Amico Ryan, so D'Amico didn't get to handpick him. But the way that they've kind of worked together has been better than anyone could have expected, in my opinion. It definitely seems that D'Amico Ryan has a style of player that he wants for his defense in particular and the whole team. And you can tell that they're in lockstep as far as getting on the same page, and that's only going to get better and better with time. The more Caserio gets to understand exactly what D'Amico is looking for and players at certain positions, the better that they will build a roster. But to your point too, I mean, the expectations just from the offseason alone, I can definitely see why. I'm assuming you're an Astros fan. Is it all
Yes.
Houston sports?
I am.
Yeah.
Yes.
So obviously we've been very blessed as Astros fans. And obviously the first month wasn't that great, so maybe that played a factor. There was crazy offseason and a slow start. But obviously we had a great year last year, and we realized we have a good quarterback. And how we mentioned earlier, I was a great person. He's easy to like, easy to root for. But just the offseason that we had alone was insane. I don't think that there's been an offseason like that. I mean, and there were so many things that happened simultaneously. Obviously the signings, you go out and get a big player in Daniil Hunter, and then you trade for Joe Mixon, you trade for Stephon Diggs. These are all massive names. Not to mention getting a linebacker in Azeez Al-Shaair, another underrated, who's very underrated. another very underrated player in Danico Autry on the defensive line. And that's just on like the football operations side. Not to mention we got new uniforms. That whole process was, us as fans got to devour that for months. There was leaks and then different snippets and everything here and there. And then I feel like I'm missing a couple. There was just so many things. And then as far as like the media too, I mean, CJ Stroud's on podcasts and interviews every week and sharing great insight every week, and as well as our other players. So the off season alone has been insane. And then obviously you have the draft, which was very exciting. And it's just, it was a lot of activity and good activity. So I can see how you have been more tuned in with the Texans this year.
Yeah, and you definitely helped with that. So that's how I tuned in with your page. So what do you think?
That's my goal is, I'm already consuming all of it, and I didn't mean for it to be this way, but I've kind of realized as I've been doing this, like, I want it to make it easier for fans to be fans. I can be a one-stop shop. I understand that people don't have the time to go to every various, reporter or page and look at stuff. Instead, I can consolidate all in one spot. And for some people too, I can be an educator. I try not to be too biased and throw my opinion out too much. I try to if there's certain things that I feel strongly about, I will, but at the very least I want to share information. And I feel like I've been very surprised, like whether it's, a commentator on ESPN talking bad about the Texans, or if it's someone talking good about the Texans or whatever it may be, I've been very surprised that not everything gets out there. Like I've noticed, like when I share a clip, it'll be, it'll get dispersed, but I feel like if it doesn't before that, people just may never know about it. But that could be to your point that, people are just more excited in general, and there's definitely a thirst and a hunger for it. It's just never ending.
Yes. 24/7 now, 12 months of the year. So what do you think of the new uniforms?
I like them. I know there were some mixed reviews, and I believe that was actually my first article I'd written for this Sporting News, but I thought it was a great process done by the Texans, including the fans' input. Obviously, no matter what you do, especially when it comes to fashion, you're never going to have 100% agreement. But my experience was, the leaks happened, and obviously they looked a lot worse than what they were. So fans were seeing that and were freaking out, somewhat rightfully so. I was somewhat looking at it through the right lens, like, okay, relax. One, we don't know if it's true. And two, this isn't professional. And then even then, when there was further leaks where it was, I think Antonio Brown had leaked it where it was like on paper, of course, that also looked terrible because it's not how it looks in real life. And then when they finally came out, so I feel like a lot of fans were not liking them at first. So when they finally came out and they saw them on the players, it's only gotten better and better. And I think we're continuing to see that as we see them in games. And that's going to happen throughout the year as we wear our different sets. But no, I like them. I mean, there might have been a couple things they could have done better. The helmets initially, there was a couple mock-ups of some different horns that I liked. But overall, it's super creative. They definitely push the boundaries of, creativity as far as the NFL is concerned. I know they're pretty usually conservative. And then the fact that we kind of put our foot through that door to introduce that new color of the kind of the Titans Oilers colors.
Yes.
I love it, and for me as a Texans fan, it's just more merch to buy and to wear. So I'm all for it.
As I mentioned, as a longtime Houston football fan with the Oilers, that Columbia blue accent, I would like to have the Oilers uniforms in total, but since that's not going to happen without a lawsuit, just having the accents is a good reminder, a good tie to the city's history, and not just for the Oilers, but for the city of Houston in general, because that color was in the Houston flag way before the Houston Oilers ever became a football team. And that's what I think the NFL and the national ownership overlook. Like, it's not just a Houston trademark. It's not just an Oilers trademark. It's a Houston signature.
Yeah.
So
I think the flag, and then also the cop cars in the 80s as well had that color. I think a lot of people, like you mentioned, are overlooking that fact. It's not just the Texans. It's like a city pride thing.
Yes. All right. So in addition to, we got the new uniforms. We just talked about that. Do you think they need a new stadium?
Do we need a new stadium? I guess you kind of hear some talk on that. in the day and age we live in, things kind of age pretty quickly, but I guess you can kind of nitpick. I mean, if we don't, I'm happy. If we do, I'm happy as well. But I like NRG. I don't know what fans would want from a new stadium. It's been a great stadium. It's hosted, Super Bowls and all kinds of events and concerts. I guess the one thing that is obviously a sore is the parking, and then the Astrodome right there, just kind of big albatross sitting right in the middle of it. So that would be the only thing. And I don't know if we necessarily need a new stadium or maybe just some makeup done to some facelifting and, finding solutions to ease the game day flow of traffic into the stadium, parking, walking, all that stuff.
Some nips and tucks.
Yes. Yeah. I think that would be good.
All right. So if you had to guess, which of the receivers do you think could be cut or traded before week 1?
Cut or traded. So this is a great topic. Typically on an NFL roster, a 53-man roster, a team keeps 6 wide receivers. I think we have the best trio of wide receivers in Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell, and Nico Collins, and also the best room from top to bottom. So with that being said, that poses a good question from yourself. We're going to have some players that will and should make other NFL rosters. So that's going to be some tough decisions on that bubble after that 6. It's been kind of tough. I mean, we've seen limited action in preseason games and, fans tend to overreact to a small sample size. And then the same thing can be said too from social media, the day and age we live in. Everything is clipped and put on the internet, and we tend to hyper focus on the bad. But that being said, I'm getting at is John Mechie has been somebody that we've been excited about, but there's been a clip of him having a couple drops, and then, this is out of thousands of reps. And then we just remember, oh, he dropped this pass and that pass. It's like, okay, we got to see the whole picture here. So, but a receiver that we all assumed we should have cutted and will be cut is Robert Woods. He's older and his contract is a little on the heavy side for the type of player he is currently. So for financial reasons, cutting or trading him would make sense. That would clear up some cap space. But I was in that boat, how we should have been cut him and probably will be cut. But in the first 2-3 weeks of camp, I've realized that he's still productive. And I've also been reviewing last year's film leading up to this season. And early on in the year, he was one of our most heavily targeted receivers. He was someone that CJ relied upon, but you can definitely tell that he is a reliable receiver. He may not be the fastest or the flashiest, but you can rely on him to be in the right spot at the right time. So there is value in that. So I still haven't really decided what will happen with him, but I will say my answer before the preseason started, and it's probably still somewhat that we still have time to figure it out. Obviously, Tank, Diggs, and Nico. And I'm kind of more of an analytical guy, and I do kind of get a lot of crap for it online. But I look at it from a positional. There's different types of receivers at positions and body sizes and skill sets. Whereas some people say that, they can all just play anywhere. I get that, but I still am of the traditional mindset. So that being said, Nico Collins is your big X receiver. And so I'm looking at it from a 2 deep. You have Nico out, your first X, and then the backup is going to either be right now, Xavier Hutchinson has been playing great. And the fact that he is on a rookie contract too matters as well. And he's young, so he's still developing, and he provides a lot of value in the jet sweep, the running game area. So right now I would put him as the backup X. So that's your 2 deep at X. He's a bigger type receiver as well. And then on the outside, Tank Dell is your Z, who can play outside and inside, but primarily most of his snaps are outside. Behind him, I would put Noah Brown, which we haven't seen or heard much from this camp because he's been battling some injuries, but his track record has been proven. I mean, the production he had last year, he stepped up big time and won us some games last year. So I would have him as the backup Z, and then the slot receiver right now is Stephon Diggs, and he seems to be thriving in that role. And then I think John Mechie will be his backup at slot, although so far he hasn't really gotten too many reps at slot. He's kind of been playing that Z receiver, but so that would be my 6. And so that would leave Robert Woods for a trade or a cut. Steven Sims is another slot receiver who is also a great special teams player, punt returner, had the big punt return touchdown against Baltimore in the playoff game. That's a tough decision there because obviously he's great in the punt return game, but I don't know if his positional value at slot receiver is enough to I think, he is not high enough to justify just the special team spot. But then I'm hoping too with Ben Skoranek, the receiver we got from the Rams, we traded for him. It was for basically peanuts, but he's somebody who could be another X receiver, but he also has a lot of versatility, which is something the staff preaches a lot. Obviously, the more you can do, the better chance you have of making a roster. He's been able to kind of go into fullback at times and also play H-back in addition to receiver. And he's also a special teams ace. He plays any and all special teams. I'm hoping they keep 7 receivers, but Ben Skoranek is like a receiver / fullback / tight end / special teamer. And then I'm trying to think of a couple other guys that I didn't maybe mention that would be, but definitely Woods and Sims are 2 guys that I think could be cut or traded that should be on a roster, in my opinion.
Okay. So
hopefully that answered your question. Pretty long-winded.
That's okay. That's fine. So who do you think is going to be QB2, Case Keenum or Davis Mills?
Oh, it should be Davis Mills, hands down. I mean, Davis has looked absolutely incredible, in my opinion, in the first 2 games in preseason. And I'm also in the boat, early on in his career. I know he's kind of a polarizing figure as far as people love or hate him. I was more so on the liking him side. I wasn't as down on him as many people were. His first 2 years, he had 2 different coordinators, and no offense, but those coordinators weren't as good as Bobby Slowick. And also the people around him weren't as good. So I think he's, wasn't really given a fair shake his first 2 years. And then now this year is his first year having the same coordinator again. And you can tell that the coaching staff as a whole offensively, in my opinion, is much better. And he's definitely reaped the benefits of that. And you could see it in these preseason games. And I even said, too, I'm not so sure that he hasn't learned from C.J. Stroud himself, even though C.J. is younger. You can tell just like the small stuff when he was specifically in that first game, in the Hall of Fame game, his mechanics, like he seemed to have like a wider base. He seemed to progress through his reads a lot quicker. And you can just tell like the subtle movements and fakes he was making. It almost looked like CJ in a way. So like in my mind, like he must have been, whether that's the quarterback coach and watching CJ, he's definitely progressed. And then obviously last year, it's still kind of a head scratcher I'm still trying to figure out exactly why Case Keenum got the nod over Mills. I tend to think in that Tennessee game for sure, it was because, it was a must-win game. And I think D'Amico, being a defensive-minded head coach, was going into that game thinking, we're going to rely on the defense. I don't want much from the quarterback. I just want a game manager for this game, someone super conservative. And so I would imagine that, he might have thought that, Davis being younger might have been more of a risk taker and he could rely on Case just to, be conservative, make a couple plays here and there with his legs. And that's ended up what happening. So I would imagine that Davis Mills is the number 2.
Okay, so do you think number 3, whoever ends up in that spot, will be traded before the season starts?
No, and I don't think we should. I mean, Case could easily be a number 2, and he's a great number 3. And I should say that I think Davis Mills could be starting for a handful of teams right now. But with Davis Mills and or Keenum, but definitely with Davis Mills and what he's shown us recently, I think, God forbid something were to happen if CJ went down short period, long period, that Mills could step in and we could still be a contender. I mean, you've seen it with the San Francisco teams over the years. They've, made runs in the playoffs with insert quarterback here, and we're in that same scheme. But with that being said, you get to keep an extra quarterback with the new emergency quarterback rule. So Case Keenum could be on the roster and not take a spot. And then also, Case Keenum, C.J. Stroud has mentioned how they have a special bond, specifically with their faith. I think that would rock the boat too much to trade him for, I don't even know what you would get for Case, but speculation for Davis is like a 5th or a 6th. I mean, I wouldn't entertain it unless it got down to a 3rd, which I don't think a team would be willing to do. So, there's no reason to mess with it, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, Case Case is another coach, basically. It's like having another coach on the sidelines. So I'm curious.
Some people have made a good point that like he may be a coach down the road for us. He could become a quarterback coach in a year or two as things kind of change.
Yeah, maybe hopefully Slowick becomes the highest paid assistant coach in NFL history, so that money isn't his incentive for ever leaving to become a head coach, and he stays here as long as DeMeco's here and as long as CJ's here. But if for some reason Slowick ever left, we might want to consider having Case Keenum as the offensive coordinator, or at least working his way up towards that title, starting with like quarterbacks coach.
Yeah, so obviously, Slowick is a hot commodity and one of the hottest names as far as a potential future head coach, and had several interviews this past offseason, and we're thankful he decided to stay. But if we're being realistic, there's a good chance that he will be a head coach in the near future. And as a fan, obviously, I've already speculated, what would be next. What I believe what we should do and probably will do is Gerard Johnson, the quarterback's coach, would likely step into the offensive coordinator role, which he himself had a lot of interviews this offseason to be an offensive coordinator himself. So, this is the trouble in having a defensive head coach is the constant turnover of OCs becoming head coaches. But I think within the Shanahan system, there's plenty of coaches that know it. So it's maybe not as big of a risk as other offensive schemes. And obviously I would, as a Texans fan, would want us to kind of replace that internally as far as externally, someone who's been there, familiar with the players and the personnel, as well as, our specific scheme. So Gerard Johnson, in my opinion, would be the next guy up for OC. And then as far as Case Keenum is concerned, he's, got a couple years left on his career. That would be a perfect way for him to transition into coaching. Is he's got a great relationship with CJ, and he could just pop right into being quarterback coach. So, we'll see what happens, but that's just a thought that came to mind. And, that I should say I did see that from fellow fans on Twitter, but I did kind of think it myself as well.
All right. So we talked about, we've been introduced to the Belichick coaching tree and the Shanahan coaching tree and some of the other coaching, Bill Walsh back in the day. Maybe we're seeing the beginning of the sproutings of the DeMeco Ryans coaching tree. But hopefully they'll all stay pit here for a while so that we can win some championships.
Yeah, I agree. I hope so too. And obviously DeMeco is defensive minded, but then, he would get the offensive side under that Shanahan tree, but he's definitely paving his own path and style. And then I will say too, because of what I mentioned earlier, as far as having to replace the offensive coordinator each year under a defensive coach, that was a sticking point for me in hiring DeMeco. I liked him as a coach, but that was my big concern with him. I preferred to have gotten an offensive coach like Shane Steichen, but obviously I am extremely happy we did not, and we got DeMeco. But I will say, to kind of like completely dismiss that concern is DeMeco's line of thinking, the fact that he's like a younger, innovative coach. And if you listen to him talk, he is cutting edge on everything. And he has expressed that he is willing to adapt, year to year, game to game, play to play. He is not afraid to make changes, which to me is the biggest thing. I feel like some of these older coaches, this is our system, our play, and we're going to run it no matter what. Like, he is willing to change anything and everything, which to me, if we got that, we're good.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so I only have a couple questions left before we get out of here today. So who is your favorite football player of all time, whether Texans or some other team?
Man, that's tough. I mean, it's early, but I mean, obviously right now it's CJ Stroud, and the way he's projecting, I feel like he's already is and is going to be more of a global superstar. And like I'd mentioned, just the player he is, and obviously his play, and just the play alone, like the decisions and throws he makes are just absolutely insane. But I guess I'll pick somebody else. If it's Texan, that's a tough call between Andre Johnson and J.J. Watt. I'll give Andre Johnson the nod because, he's older and just got inducted to the Hall of Fame. He was, definitely one of a kind. And then as far as overall player, I mean, you kind of got to respect greatness. I mean, Tom Brady he was incredible, man. Definitely fun to watch. And I definitely found myself rooting for him year in, year out, whenever our teams wouldn't be in the playoffs, just rooting for greatness. So I guess those would be my three different little eras there.
Yeah, I think I'm going to pick one on each side of the ball. Going back to the Oilers, Earl Campbell was my favorite. He was fun to watch. I'm sure he wasn't fun to play defense against him. You've probably seen videos of him just
Absolutely,
putting
yeah.
his helmet into the sternum of
Beast.
linebackers and running them over like they're babies on a highway or something. It's
Insane.
just unfortunately it shortened his career and made his post football life not a pleasurable experience. But he left it all out on the field. He was fun to watch. And on defense, Ray Childress. I don't know if you know much about him. He was a Texan or an Oilers linebacker.
Yeah, I'm
He's
familiar.
probably until they got Lamar Lathan, like not long before they moved to Tennessee. Childress was probably the fastest linebacker I'd seen, and so he could cover from sideline to sideline. He was just fun to watch. So those are my two favorite Texans. So we got an Oiler and a Longhorn and an Aggie there.
There you go.
And from from the Texans, the ones you mentioned, J.J. Watt, as I'm wearing his jersey right now,
Yep.
and then on the offensive side, Andre Johnson. Fun to watch his whole career. It's there's just something satisfying about watching a player go into the Hall of Fame that you've seen his whole career. Like when Jeff Bagwell was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame, I went to Cooperstown for that.
Oh, wow.
And it's just, you feel like there's some kind of, like you had some part in that. And
Absolutely.
it's just really a satisfying situation. It would have been nice to go to Canton, Ohio for the NFL Hall of Fame this summer, but I've never been to Canton, so that's something I need to add to my bucket list.
I agree 100%. I mean, you I guess in my instance, grow up, but like you spend so much of your time in your life rooting and watching for these players that you feel like, they've been a part of your life,
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so before we go, let's get your prediction on the 2024-25 season for the Texans. What record do you think they will finish in the regular season?
So I'm very, very optimistic and high in the Texans. Initially, I was, kind of being reserved and thinking of past teams and letting that affect and try and, caution my excitement. But I realized that, the past is the past and has nothing to do with this current team. I've been saying this, D'Amico Ryans is not Bill O'Brien and CJ Stroud is not Deshaun Watson. So we shouldn't, allow the past to affect. This is a whole different team and organization from top to bottom we're talking about. So with that being said, I've embraced, obviously I've been devouring every piece of information and seen all the moves we made, and I know I am biased, but I think we are a legit Super Bowl contender. I think we will go 13-4. I understand we do have a very, very tough schedule. If I had to say, I would put the range between, if I had to do low end and high end, I guess a broad range would be 11-14, but I would say 13, but I could see it being 12-13 wins. But the way the schedule shakes out, it's obviously very difficult, but one thing to remember too is, obviously preseason, the strength of schedule and how it appears on paper is always completely different than what it is after the season. So as much as we harp on that, we have to remember it's not always going to play out how you think it is. Teams have injuries, coaches get fired, different things happen where teams aren't what you think they're going to be. But the way our schedule is set up, it is extremely on the front loaded with ease. Like the first 6 games of the season are all very winnable. So for me, it's super imperative to get off to a hot start in that span. And at the most, I think we can only afford to lose 2 games in those first 6 games. If not 6-0, it needs to be 4-2. I believe that's before week 7 against Green Bay. But that being said, because in the later half of the season, we have what I call the gauntlet, which is 3 games in 10 days. It's Miami, Kansas City, and Baltimore. So it's 3 of the top teams in the AFC in 10 days. So obviously, if you maximize that first part of the schedule, you allow yourself some more margin for error, especially during that stretch with, potential injuries and whatnot. But, and I do think home field advantage is imperative at 13 games. We might be right on the cusp of that. Last year, the Ravens were the number 1 seed with 14 wins. So we'll see how that shakes out as far as seeding goes.
Yeah, and they've got a really late bye this year. So I think, was it week 13 they have the bye?
which might help with the way that, that 10-game gauntlet is. It might kind of help us get prepared for that.
Yeah, they're going to definitely need to rest up for that. That's a lot of games in a short period of time against some really tough opponents. So we'll see. I think my range is a little less optimistic than yours. So I would say between 10 and 12 would be my range, with the expectation of being in the middle. So I think anywhere between my 10 on the low end and your 14 on the high end will get us a pretty high seed in a home playoff game.
Yeah, I mean, very least you just want to get in the dance, which for sure we'll get in the dance. So,
yes, absolutely. So my guest today for this special episode of the Houston Texans season preview is Garret Williams. Go follow him on Twitter at Houston Stressins. So, Garret, thanks for being here today. This has been a lot of fun to talk about this team.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Melvin. And just to kind of clarify a little bit it's kind of confusing because you have your handle and then your nickname. My handle is at Texans Commenter on Twitter or X and TikTok. But then on Instagram, it's at Houston Stressins. But if you're looking for any Texans news, a one-stop shop, I'm your guy. And, hopefully we get a Super Bowl this year. If not, sometime in the next 3-4 years. I definitely think it's a possibility. But I appreciate you having me on, Mills. I had a blast.
Well, thanks for coming on. So if the Texans reach the Super Bowl this year, let's meet here again and talk about the game.
You got it. I'll be here.
We'll go live. We'll be risky. We'll just go live that day.
Hey, I'll be excited. I might be a little intoxicated too. Just a heads up.
All right. Thanks again for being here, Garret. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, sir, Melvin. Appreciate you.
Thank you to all the listeners joining us today, and go Texans.
That was Stories from Real Life. Join us again next week for another great storytelling journey. See you next time.